All right, Chris Cuomo here. Welcome to NewsNation. We're covering this breaking news that you see on your screen. Small airplane, supposedly a medevac mission, crashed shortly after takeoff several miles from the airport into a mixed area, residential and commercial. You see fires there. The two passengers are reportedly dead after the crash. There are reports of as many as half a dozen in the surrounding area. Who have been killed, houses on fire. We're monitoring the situation. Now, just to state the obvious, this is in Philadelphia. It is nothing like the crash that we are also covering tonight as we learn more about what happened in D.C. It's clearly not related, so dismiss what you're seeing on social media and those conspiracies. Again, small plane, two aboard, several miles from the airport after taking off. There's obviously weather and a little bit of a compromised canopy in terms of what they were flying through. Local officials are all over the place and first responders trying to control the spread of the fires. You have all these connected homes there, so you have to be concerned about the contiguity that they have adjoining walls and fire can spread easily there. We have experts on hand to discuss the latest about the Black Hawk chopper that flew right into the path of a landing regional jet, so we're well teed up for this. Witnesses have been talking about this crash. And I want to bring them in right now. We have former air traffic controller Todd Yeary and former Black Hawk crew chief Mark McAtherton. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being with me tonight. Obviously, we're going to discuss something else in a moment, but I wanted to get your take on this. Todd, I'll start with you. Medevac flights, very common. What about this evening suggests that they were in tough conditions?
Well, it's hard to say what the conditions were, Chris. Here's the issue. They had been given a takeoff clearance. Obviously, they had initiated the takeoff, and shortly after takeoff, something happened that caused for a very steep descent. We don't know if that's something mechanical or something on the flight deck, and so it's too early to know exactly what happened. But as always, we have to do a full investigation before we can reach any conclusions.
Chief, what are your questions?
Yeah, so the thing that comes to mind immediately is both rotary wing and fixed wing aircraft, they have the ability to glide if something goes catastrophic in the aircraft. So normally, if like the engines go out, both engines can go out, it can still glide and get to someplace safer. The fact that this went straight down says something catastrophic aerodynamically rather than mechanically to me. And so it sounds like either a wing flaps got stuck or ailerons got stuck or something like that. It's a mechanical issue that would cause that nose to dive down. And the Black Hawk, back in the late 80s and 90s, it had a nickname for being a lawn dart because the stabilator would fail down and cause it to crash. I don't think the Learjet 55 has a history of that, but this seems like something very mechanical, catastrophic happened, and it caused that to go immediately in a nosedive.
NTSB has had a couple of busy days. I want to bring in someone who is a former investigator for them just to kind of give some shape of what questions are going to be asked about what's happening on the ground here. Alan Deal joins us now. Alan, we're just discussing what kinds of questions have to get asked early on here about why this two-seater Learjet or two passengers that were in this Learjet 55 apparently crashed shortly after takeoff. As you know, it was supposedly a medevac flight. They were on their way to get someone or something. What is the immediate assessments that you need to do in a situation like this?
Of course, the first thing they're going to do is do the recovery effort, and they're going to be looking for the proverbial black boxes. But I agree with your previous guests. I would I'm just speculating. I've never flown the Lear 55. I've flown earlier Learjets. I'm not what they say type rated in the Lear, but it's a fairly tricky airplane to fly. And if anything mechanically fails, like the stabilator, the back tail becomes loose or is mechanically disconnected, you can lose control and you could go into a nosedive, but obviously we're only speculating. This is awfully early in that Philadelphia Learjet crash. I can remember a couple of other accidents I didn't really investigate, but the Ginny Rivera's Learjet. That was at altitude, not a takeoff accident. But
right.
The Lear is a fairly tricky airplane to fly, and things can go wrong in a big hurry. It's a very efficient airplane, generally safe. The 55 is one of the late models of that aircraft. Mm-hmm. But we'll have to wait till they get the recorders, and hopefully there'll be enough wreckage left to make some assessments. But it sure looks like it went in hard and spurned. So it's going to be
We
hard.
have a witness. We have a witness. Let's see if they were able to see anything that helps us understand how this went down. Who do we have on the phone, Dusty? All right, Ryan Tion. Do me a favor. Leave the prompter up so I don't have to guess at information all night long. Ryan, thank you very much for joining us. And did you see the crash, or did you pick up what happened after the crash?
Glad to be here. I didn't witness the initial impact, like the plane falling out of the sky, but I saw the aftermath, like the explosion, the mushroom cloud, and was fortunate, and was like quick enough to snap a few pictures of it. But to me, like what I saw was like there was an initial like huge bright flash of orange that kind of lit up the entire sky, which like made me look up, and then I saw the massive mushroom cloud in front of me.
Well, thank God you're okay. I appreciate you capturing images to try to help people understand this, but the most important thing is that you're safe. So, Ryan, thank you. I hope you stay that way. Don't get too close to that situation until you know it's all completely under control. Now, obviously, fellas, what Ryan is telling us, that there was a red burst early on, and then the cloud does speak to a high-speed impact, which goes to the idea of whether or not this had been a glided or controlled landing. It doesn't seem that way. All right, so, gentlemen, let's do this. I want to talk about what we've learned about the D.C. crash, but I need to set the table for the audience. So we're going to give you more details on Philadelphia as they come on our watch. We're going to turn now to what happened in Washington, D.C., and new information we have about the chopper. But before we get to the experts, I want to set the table for you about what this is, because there's an aspect of it that can't be ignored here, which is the tragedy in D.C. Has now taken on a new dimension, which is that it has become a political situation, okay? We can't ignore that. The parties both tried to blame the crash on the other, right out of the box. Why? Because nothing is sacred anymore. Nothing is spared the indignity of being ammunition for advantage of one over the other. No one is as good at this game as our president. But his play here doesn't make sense to me yet. NewsNation's not about gotchas, but we are about driving leaders to get us to a better place. And nothing's going to get better if leaders are committed to just settling for arguing over which side is worse. And that's what's happening here. We do not know why that Black Hawk helicopter was at an unusual altitude, and why the comms were confused, and why an experienced military crew with night vision goggles couldn't see what was apparently right in front of them. For Trump, though, the answer was clear before we even knew anything that I just told you. Bad hiring by the FAA. We don't know that air traffic control had anything to do with this at this point. He says, well, that's just common sense. Is it? Or is it this sense that has become uncommon, which is just attack, use it to your advantage? Look, we learned today air traffic controllers alerted the helicopter twice about the incoming American Airlines jet a full 2 minutes before the crash. Listen for yourself.
If traffic just off the workspace here today at 1,000 north of feet, start from way 3.
Scott has a traffic site request visual separation.
This separation group. S25, get the CRJ in sight. S25, pass on this CRJ.
Scott has a aircraft in sight request visual separation.
Separation.
Now, we don't know what it means. We don't know if they thought they were talking about the same aircraft. We'll get into that. But I don't think this is so much about the facts as much as it is about our president creating a fiction. Our president seems intent on making 67 dead and all the loved ones affected stand as proof that DEI literally kills. And only Trump can fix it. There are two parts to his argument: that diversity in hiring is bad, and that's what happened here at the FAA, and that he did things differently so this would not have happened under his watch unless Biden had changed the way he had it. Now, that's a powerful message. Forcing a radical liberal agenda literally cost 67 lives. At a minimum, it's highly insensitive to the realities and timing of this tragedy. But the more basic offense is that it is clearly not accurate, and the president likely knows that. This is not a secret. I'm not making this up. It's not new information. Trump was confronted with this canard yesterday.
I put safety first. Obama, Biden, and the Democrats put policy first. The FAA's website states they include hearing, vision, missing extremities, partial paralysis, complete paralysis, epilepsy, severe intellectual disability, psychiatric disability, and dwarfism all qualify for the position of a controller.
But first, if I can, the cited FAA text that you read is real, but the implication that this policy is new or that it stems from efforts that began under President Biden or the Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg is demonstrably false. It's been on the FAA's website.
Who said that, you?
No, it's on the website, the FAA's website. It was there in 2013. It was there for the entirety.
Take a look what I read.
It was there for the entirety of your administration,
nice and easy.
too. So my question is, why didn't you change the policy during your first administration?
I did change it. I changed the Obama policy.
Now, look, I get that he wants that to be true, but it isn't. And I get that he's going to be defensive in this because no matter how competent the question, it plays as a gotcha. And no politician, no spokesperson, let alone Trump, is going to admit to any wrongdoing when they know there's a viral moment in the making. So basically, Trump just tells the guy to shut up. And his resistance now has an army behind it, right? All his supporters dismiss the media as what? Fake news. And now there's a new huge asset in Trump's army, Twitter. Elon Musk echoed his argument about the FAA and DEI hiring. He put it all over Twitter with his algorithms that reach hundreds of millions of people. He is the president's greatest amplifier, using apparently all the algorithmic power of his platform. So that's what they want you to believe. And if Trump changed it, and if it had just stayed like that, everything would be okay. Okay? So we did basic research about what this is, okay? And here are the facts. First, 71% of air traffic controllers and airfield operations specialists are white. 78% are male. So it's hard to argue that diversity in hiring has spoiled the ranks. Did Trump change the Obama policy like he suggested? No. And he knows this because he was confronted with it and didn't want to deal with it. So how do we know? In his last month in office in 2020, the same language is on the FAA website that he quoted at the press conference. The same language. Not only did he not identify a problem of the Democratic policy and then he changed it, that didn't happen. In fact, he echoed and extended it when he was president. How do we know? In 2019, the FAA launched a pilot program that helped prepare people with disabilities for careers in air traffic control operations. Guess who was president in 2019? Trump. Not only did he not change Obama's standard, it was the same standard, and he added to it in a way that would encompass people with disabilities, adding more diversity. And I'm not questioning expanding the talent pool. I certainly don't see it as a problem, but he does. And we know that because his new Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, was very anxious to echo this argument. He said diversity is not America's greatest strength. Unity is, and shared purpose. But my question is, what gives us unity and shared purpose? Isn't it inherent that we accept all of the different types of people that go into the melting pot and forge through the crucible of our shared experience one people? Isn't that what e pluribus unum means? Out of many, one? Isn't that why we put it on the coin? A collaborative and cooperative effect that no other country has ever been able to match. That's America's secret sauce. I get arguing about how diversity is introduced into the workforce and whether or not it's being forced. The goal should be merit, not just type. But we know why we want diversity. We know the why. If we're not utilizing all the potential we have in this society, which is the signature blessing of America, if you believe that God shed his grace on thee is in America, you have to recognize that part of that ordination, part of that blessing is the unique mixture of people who've come together here. We've never seen anything like it in this world, the mixture of people who have made America great. So yeah, it's about unity. But our unity is a function of all the different kinds that come together like fingers into a fist. So I don't accept the premise that diversity is somehow bad. And I know as a matter of fact, the hiring practices at the FAA were no different under Trump. And to the extent that they changed during his watch, he amplified diversity as a component of the hiring at the FAA. So what he is saying is not only untrue, but it is unkind to the people who have suffered in this situation, and I don't know how it gets us to a better place. So let's discuss what we do know that's true about this and what helps us understand why it happened as we keep developing what's happening in Philadelphia. Now, everybody is going to be covering this tonight, okay? And that's not because the story is going to continue developing, because it probably won't, but that's what happens in live news coverage. So as we learn more about what's happening in Philly, I'll tell you. But nothing has changed since I told you there was a crash of a Learjet 55 leaving an airport in Philadelphia, supposedly on a medevac flight. And it crashed shortly after takeoff into an area near a mall, lit some houses on fire and some other structures. There are reports that there are as many as half a dozen dead. First responders are on the ground. All the local reports say that they have the situation under control. There is no real explanation for why this aircraft crashed. We spoke to a witness who said he saw a bright orange light and then a mushroom cloud. Experts will suggest that that is part of an analysis that shows a very high-speed impact, meaning this wasn't a controlled crash. Let's bring back former air traffic controller Todd Yeary and former Black Hawk crew chief Mark McArthurton. It's good to have you both joining me again. Thank you. I don't have anything new to ask you about Philly, but Chief, I was watching you earlier today explain the dynamic inside the Black Hawk. Now that we've learned this was an experienced crew, they were doing what was required of them as an annual nighttime operation, a certification. And how do you explain for people like me who do not understand the sophistication? I've been in a Black Hawk many times, but I don't know flying at all. It seems so steady and consistent going across as the other regional jet is landing. So consistent that people early on used it as reason to speculate it was intentional. How do you understand the disconnect between air traffic control communicating with them, but them not adjusting to what the air traffic controller thought would have been obvious?
Yeah, it's just a misunderstanding completely between the air crew and air traffic control. We see the Black Hawk coming down the Potomac, just passing a peninsula and then making a slight right turn. And that slight right turn was about 5 seconds before impact. And what immediately stood out to me in that turn is when we make those turns, there's two things that are happening. One pilot is looking at a map. Two, the second pilot is listening to them. The person that's looking at the map is going to give them a heading to turn to. So the second pilot is going to be looking at the compass for the heading. So those are two guys with their eyes inside the aircraft, making a turn right there. So that stands out. They just had left a refueling point. There's checkpoint. There's checklists that you have to go through that they will be looking down in their lap on. And the crew chief is going to be on the opposite side on that Black Hawk, back by that door, than where the impact would have come from. And so it's a perfect scenario of a blind spot. What we see from the camera on the ground is an entirely different perspective. It looks straight because you don't see the turn going this way or this way from that angle. It just looks like it's still straight. And so it's a bad perspective taking information from the ground versus being in the seat itself. When you have air traffic control asking them if they see a flight, the two-way communication is really important in the aircraft. I would have liked to have heard that going on the outside of the aircraft, that they confirm exactly where it was in the air. But yeah, it sounds like just a real miscommunication and a lack of understanding on which aircraft people were looking at.
Yeah, Todd, we were having explained to us that the people in the chopper have to deal with three-dimensional movement of that craft. There's pitch, there's roll, and there's yaw. And that creates all different angles, and obviously you could get confused no matter how sophisticated. The question of, well, maybe they thought the air traffic controller was talking to them about a different plane, the one that was taking off. Maybe that's the one they thought that was being addressed, which is why they never altered course at all. The communication from the air traffic controller, did that sound like the right way to communicate what was needed to be communicated?
Chris, I'm glad you raised that question. I want to go back to the audio segment that you shared at the beginning. That was the part of the audio recording that I had been wondering about from the first time they started playing snippets. That's the initial indication of what we would call calling traffic. The Black Hawk pilots are told you've got traffic, you've got a position, you've got a distance, you've got an altitude, and then there's an instruction about the movement. What was interesting to me is it's purported that the pilot of the Black Hawk asked for authority to maintain visual separation, which was approved. At that point in time, the controller believes that the traffic that was called and the pilot responded to is actually the airplane they're talking about. And the pilot has now said, I will assume responsibility for maintaining separation from that aircraft. That was approved. The second transmission is as you begin to see the paths converge, and obviously the altitudes are changing, is again asking the Black Hawk pilot, do you have the RJ in sight? That's the second time, not the first time. Mm-hmm. And so there's an issue there of whether or not the identification was maintained, noting the three-dimensional responsibilities inside the helicopter. Right. And at night, when you're identifying an aircraft by strobe, by movement, it is sometimes difficult to be able to continue to track a moving aircraft while you're also trying to maintain flight control.
Chief, you're nodding in agreement. Just one quick thing, because we have up with you guys the box of Philly. This is not live picture, okay? It would say live if it were live. This is looped, okay? This is the aftermath of the Philly crash. There is a scene that we've added to the B-roll of what happened, a capture of the jet coming down at high speed at a very severe angle right into the ground and exploding, which does answer the question that was posed early on by Chief McCatherton as to whether or not this was a controlled glide, emergency landing, or it was a catastrophic crash. It was certainly a catastrophic crash. But this is not live. This happened about 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's the crash and explosion that I'm talking about. We are now told that it was a doctor and a patient in a medevac operation. That's what the flight was. And I have no more information than that. The fires have been put under control. There are reports that there are as many as a half dozen who were killed. I cannot confirm that. And that's early. Investigators are just getting on the ground now. First responders have been there. The situation is reportedly under control. I have a former NTSB investigator on, Alan Deal, who I want to ask one question about each situation. About Philadelphia first. How does it change the reckoning that you see the video now of this severe angle and high-speed impact into the ground?
Chris, I should say I haven't seen the video, but I can visualize what you're talking about, and still this is quite a mystery, and I don't want to keep going back to this Jenny Rivera crash, because that was a Learjet that went straight in, okay, and that was turns out it was a rudder problem that was inducing a flutter in the horizontal tail. Unfortunately, it was in Mexico that it crashed. They didn't get out there in time to get the physical evidence. It didn't burn. But what I'm saying is, if you've got a problem with any of the control surfaces in that Learjet, you can easily lose control of the airplane, because it is it was originally designed to be a fighter pilot. I think probably your other guest knows that. and they converted it into a business jet. It's fairly tricky to fly. So if anything goes wrong, and I'm not saying it has to be a control surface, whether it's the tail or ailerons or what have you, but they're a fairly sensitive plane. And of course, this is new information about the doctor and patient. Obviously, that means there were 4 people. There's got to be 2 pilots on a Lear 55. So unfortunately, we've got 4 victims, as well as, now you did say a doctor and a patient was aboard. I didn't know that. I thought they were going to go pick up somebody. But
that is a report. That's a report. That's a report, Alan. Okay. I'm not saying that a doctor and patient were flying it. I'm saying that reportedly it was a medevac flight, and there was a doctor and patient both on it. We're going to get more details about who was flying. So Jenny Rivera, by the way, was a Latina pop star whose private plane crashed. Just for people at home in terms of remembering that incident. All right, let's go back to the D.C. one, and I have a different question for you, Alan, which is, what difference does the altitude of the Black Hawk helicopter make in the analysis? The altitude didn't seem to be something that was a concern to the air traffic controllers because they never said anything about the altitude of the helicopter. So how do you look at that?
Well, first of all, the controller's very busy, and he's not checking on the altitude of every airplane or helicopter that's flying in his control zone. So, it's at night. But like everybody, I'm asking, starting with the president and the Secretary of Defense, why would if the facts are correct that this aircraft was over 200 feet, that was a big red flag to me. Now, I'm not a Black Hawk pilot. I have flown in helicopters with NVGs. And so as an aviation psychologist, I've got to try to figure out why would that happen. Now, the female, she's not a student. She was a pilot going for her annual check ride. She knows there's a hard ceiling at 200 feet. She knows if that helicopter goes above 200 feet, she's flunked the check ride, all right? So there's no way she's going to intentionally bust that, what they call hard ceiling of 200 feet above the ground. But reportedly, somehow the airplane climbed, and I'm thinking, what could cause? I'm an aviation psychologist, like I said, and we try to get into the mind of the pilots and put ourselves in that position. Something must have happened, okay? And of course, the cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder will probably answer this question. As you know, the Black Hawk now has those. It's a combined black box, actually. But I was thinking, could a bird strike cause that? Well, possibly. Could have a mechanical problem. We talked about the Learjet situation, possibly. But I know that pilot undergoing the check ride is not going to bust that 200-foot above ground ceiling because she knows she'll flunk the check ride. Something drastic must have happened at the last second. And it struck me that if you're wearing night vision goggles, and they had them, we don't know if they were down. The NTSB and the Pentagon will have to look at the helmets and so on.
Right.
As you know, night vision goggles flip up like binoculars. Anyway, my thought was, if you're hit with bright lights with an NVG, it's going to startle you, all right? And that regional jet was coming right at the helicopter. What if they were hit with the landing lights of the Learjet? You could easily get a startle response, both the pilot and the co-pilot, the instructor pilot, and that could cause a startle response. Causes it's an automatic response. Your arms contract. I'm making this a little more complicated than I need to, but I'm saying that's only one possibility. I'm not saying that's what happened, but I'm trying to figure out why she would bust that 200-foot ceiling and risk flunking the check ride. Of course, we'll have to wait for the NTSB.
I got it. Chief McCatherton, 2 things. One, as you may know, on social media, they identified the wrong female pilot who had to come forward and say, that's not me, by the way, seeing how everybody's dead and I'm alive. Please stop using my picture. And then, of course, a lot of these pod people didn't stop using it because when you got a point that you think works for you, it's tough to abandon it. The assertion that if it was a female pilot, that somehow that should be part of the explanation of error. What do you make of that as somebody who's a pro?
Yeah, I've crewed with female pilots left and right, and they are every bit as amazing as the males. That's not a hindrance or an issue at all. The problem that we're having on social media right now is these conspiracy theories. They are so cruel and hurtful to the families that have survived. These crew members were serving their country and doing their job, and they're doing so with dignity and honor. And these families should never feel shame or guilt over what happened here. There's going to be an NTSB report that comes out, and 999 times out of 1,000, human error, pilot error is a component. They call it a contributing factor. That's going to be there, but that does not mean they didn't do their job. People make mistakes. These things are crewed by humans, not machines. After every mission we do, we have what we call an after-action review. It's called AAR. We do 3 things. We look at what we did awesomely. We want to repeat that. We want to keep doing that. We want to look at what we did wrong. Okay, we need to identify those, and then we look at how to mitigate those. We write that down. We do that before we do anything else after shutting down, because we record that and turn that over to the safety guys, turn that over to the trainers so they can grill this stuff in. I have never in my entire career had an after-action review where the what went wrong area was blank. Every mission, every flight has things that go wrong, and because we're humans and this happens. And so these speculations, tying it to gender, tying it to DEI, tying it to anything else, all they do is hurt the families of people that are serving honorably. And it's disgusting to me.
It's a point well made. Let's do this, gentlemen. Let's take a break. I'm going to come back. We're trying to get a witness on the phone who may have had a better set of eyes on the initial impact in Philadelphia to help us understand the video we're seeing. And, of course, I'm going to need you guys to help me understand it and explain it to the audience. So we'll take a quick break. We'll come back with more on this developing situation in Philadelphia where a small plane has crashed in a mixed area, residential, and there's a strip mall nearby. The situation's under control, but we don't know why it happened, and there are as many as half a dozen dead. And, of course, we've learned new information about the Black Hawk helicopter, about what it was doing, and what happened right before the crash. Stay with us. During this developing story in Philadelphia, a small plane, a Learjet, crashed there. Apparently, it was a medevac flight that had taken off from a nearby executive airport, a private airport. 6 were on board, reportedly, 2 doctors, 2 pilots, a patient, and a family member of a patient. When it crashed, and now we're seeing video that shows a more extreme angle, one of the good points of analysis that was brought up early here by one of our experts was that, hey, so if it's a controlled thing, that gives us one scenario about what they were dealing with. And obviously, when you get the black box, you'll know exactly what they were saying. But this had a much more steep, severe angle of entry at high speed, which of course suggests that this was catastrophic, meaning that it was completely out of control. We have another witness to the situation in Philadelphia. There's a press conference starting now, so let's do that first and see what the word from the ground is in Philadelphia.
Went down in the vicinity of Roosevelt Mall on Cottman Avenue. This occurred shortly after 6 p.m. this evening. As of right now, we have no reports on the number of fatalities. So right now, we're just asking for prayers for any and everyone who may have been affected. We do want to note that several dwellings and vehicles were impacted. So what are we asking you to do for us right now, Philadelphia? We're urging you to please stay away from the scene. If you see debris, call 911. Don't touch anything. This is still an active scene under investigation. I'm proud to note that all of our federal and state partners, they are either en route here or on the ground with us right now. We did see some neighbors who live in the surrounding community. Just stay in your home, Again, it's still an active scene and it's under investigation. This is only the first of many briefings, I'm sure, to come on this evening. And of course, when daylight comes, when we have more facts and information to share with you. But I do want to say a special thank you right now, again, to all of our federal and state partners and our amazing first responders right here in the city of Philadelphia. Our fire, our EMS, our police.
All right, this is the part of the press conference where it becomes like an Oscar acceptance speech. This is Mayor Sherrell Parker, Mayor of Philadelphia, obviously a little flustered dealing with this emerging situation. And the headline is, they don't know what happened. They don't even know how many are dead. That's not unusual in this kind of dynamic situation. So it's going to take time. That's why I don't like going with numbers early on. You know, there is pressure in the media to be able to give you new information. Here's a new number. Here's a new number of injured. Here's a new number of dead. Here's a new detail. And a lot of times they're wrong. And just as often as they're wrong, they're really deceptive. And they're feeding the wrong instinct of just wanting more information as opposed to right information. So as you can tell, the mayor doesn't know what's going on. It just happened. They're trying to figure it out. The first responders have the situation under control, we are told, which doesn't surprise us because they are angels among us. We have another witness to the crash via Zoom, Stanley James III. Stanley, can you see me? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you perfectly.
All right. You're joining me and our experts here so they can help me understand anything that you tell us. Thank God you're well. If you were close enough to see what happened, what did you see?
So basically, me and my family, we were pulling up to the parking lot. We usually frequent that area. I had an interview tomorrow, so we were going to go get me some pants before everything closed down, going to the Ross. And as we were pulling up to the drive-through, the drive-in area to come into the whole plaza, we seen it just shoot past us. It was like, boom. I didn't hear nothing. We just heard everything once it boomed, and then the car shake. I jumped out because the kids were yelling, everybody were yelling. We seen it. It was a big flash just in flames. And I got out. I ran towards it. I was trying to see if anybody was okay, and I'm not really cool with, airplane smoke and stuff like that. I heard it's kind of bad for you, so I didn't want to get too close, but it was it was chaotic. Everybody was everywhere. People were calling for their family. When we were pulling up, there were a couple people that were parked right there in that area, like maybe waiting for people to come out of the parking, area. And it was just so much going on. It was too much. It was chaotic.
Did you see that anybody had been hit by the plane or hit by any of the debris and injured?
I didn't see it, but I knew for sure because, like I said, when I pulled up, it was a lot of people that was waiting in that common area right there where it struck at. I wouldn't be able to tell you too many, but it's 6:30 in the afternoon. A lot of people frequent that mall, and it was a pretty nice amount of people outside. It was still early.
Yeah, no, I hear you. Thank God you weren't affected by it. I appreciate you telling us what you saw. It helps us understand why the mayor was saying we don't know yet. We don't know how many are affected. And especially with how jet fuel burns, it creates a different dynamic in terms of identifying if anybody's injured or worse. So thank God you and the family are okay. Good luck on your interview. I hope it goes really well. You certainly got a story to tell when you go to the interview.
Sir.
All right, God bless you and the family. Todd, with what we're seeing here now, I want your take on it. We're seeing new video that does show a very high speed, almost straight up and down angle. I mean, it's probably better than 65 degrees, the angle that it hits. Massive explosion, a lot of disintegration on impact. What are those suggestions of to you?
Sounds like the crew did not have much time to respond, if time at all. If the airplane was in a takeoff roll, it was increasing in speed to make sure it could get to the lift speed and was probably increasing speed when it reaches a point. It could very well be that as it's reaching that point, if it wasn't something that contributed to the catastrophe that we now see on the climb, certainly shortly thereafter, and there was no time literally to be able to react or respond to either change the pitch of the airplane or to regain control of the airplane. So all of this seems to have happened very quickly. And there wasn't much time to even call for any assistance from air traffic control. We don't hear any of that as well. So once the takeoff roll was finished and the airplane was in the air, it wasn't long after before it was going down.
Hey, Chief, I don't know. Are you able to see the video, Chief, that we're rolling, or?
Not currently, but to piggyback off what he just said, that Learjet, it's got a max speed of about 541 miles an hour. So it's, like you said, it's increasing speed, that's zooming along, and then you have a catastrophic failure and drive that straight in the ground. They have extended range models. I'm not sure if this particular one was that. If it is, that's additional fuel. We're looking at about 1,000 pounds of fuel on that. That's 1,000 gallons. It's about 7,000 pounds of fuel. And rainy day, the ground's wet, and we know fuel and water don't mix. So now that the coverage and spread of that is catastrophic, if it lands in a populated area like that, that's the concern for the people on the ground is very serious one.
Two interesting points there for you to explain a little bit more to us, Chief. The first one is what the debris field, let's call it, in terms of how big an area something like this can affect. And water and oil don't mix, right? Jet fuel has a lot of oil in it. But explain what wetness can do in terms of spreading out danger.
Absolutely. So if you have a layer of water and it's not going to mix with any kind of petroleum product whatsoever, so the petroleum product just floats on top. It's more than a float. It's a very low viscosity. It spreads out very quickly and very easily. And if that is on fire, that spread can happen very immensely, very quickly. We saw the video of it hit and the massive explosion that it had. At that speed, with that much fuel, the debris field is going to be significant. The mayor put out a very good point. I think it's important for listeners that are in that area. It's absolutely critical that nobody touch anything there for investigators. Every little bit of debris has information, be it how something fell apart or how it burned. Material burns at different degrees, at different temperatures, at different rates, and different information can be gleaned from that. And so just the way it comes apart there, it's important that people stay away, let the investigators get the truth from this.
Gentlemen, I appreciate you. Thank you for doing double duty with us tonight. I appreciate it very, very much. Very helpful to the audience. And that's what we're trying to foster here, right, is that people understand it as opposed to using it to make some other point, which has happened too much these days. Chief McCatherton, appreciate it very much. Todd Urey, thank you. Appreciate both of your expertise. As we learn more, I'd love to have you back. All right? Thank you very much.
Anytime.
Absolutely. Thanks, Chris.
All right, we're going to take a break here. And as we go, we saw the Philly mayor. My reference, just so you understand, when I said this is the point where it becomes like an Oscar acceptance speech, there is this decorum that we have in these press conferences where you got to thank everybody in this group and that group. And I understand why that's important to the politicians, but doesn't help us understand anything any better. That's what I mean by that. The Philly mayor has her hands full. She is going to be putting out various reports, and we'll bring them to you here. Please stay with NewsNation. Where the pilots were not able to have any kind of control as this was crashing. It's on fire. That's why the angle was as steep as it is, and that's why it was going this fast, and that's why it has such a big debris field. Dusty, you have a caller who just happens to be a pilot, so we'll get their take on what's happening.
His name is Art, and he happens to be an Air Force, former or an Air Force pilot. He can tell you more. Art from Florida.
Art, what do you see in this video that's worth explanation? Thank you for calling.
Well, I'm an Air Force pilot, search and rescue veteran with 48 years as fixed-wing pilot in command, and I can tell you, when you are in the area of controlled airspace, you are under 100% control of the air traffic controllers. My opinion, they had that Black Hawk a little too close to the RJ.
Wait, so you're talking about the D.C. crash, not the Philly one. Say that again, Art. When you're under what altitude, and what do you mean that you're in control?
Okay, when you're in controlled airspace, that's by an airport, you're 100% under the control of air traffic controllers. In my opinion, they had that Black Hawk too close to the RJ, even though they diverted it to the right to go into 33, it was too close. They should have kept that Black Hawk back. And, you know, when you hear the voice recordings, we're going to know what really happened, whether they misunderstood what air traffic was telling them. But they were definitely too close.
And you see being too close as a function of ATC, the air traffic controller, and not what was happening in the chopper?
That's correct.
Okay. Now let me get your take on Philly. If you see that jet was actively burning, you see the flames, it was on fire as it was crashing. What does that tell you about pilots' ability to have any kind of control and how something like that might have happened?
It appears that they had absolutely no control whatsoever. There was some type of engine issue that they had there with flames coming out, and they were just going down. That's it. You know, it was bad.
Yeah, I mean, the idea of catastrophic, I mean, it doesn't get more than that. The whole aircraft was on fire. Now, of course, as you well know, and the audience should know also, you got to remember the most active attribute of fire is going to be air. So the more air there is, the more fire there's going to be. Falling at that rate of speed, that fire is going to get hot and intense. And it just lets you know that the poor people who were in that aircraft, we now believe it was maybe a pediatric patient, their doctor, a family member. It was a medevac flight. And it's just horrible that this was something that happened way up high. That was catastrophic, and it basically just became a bomb that crashed right into this Philadelphia area. Dusty, you have another caller?
We do actually have another caller, and his name is Greg, and he is an air traffic controller, I believe, out of California.
Hey, Greg, did you hear the last caller and his take? I'll repeat it just in case, which is when you're in controlled airspace, like around an airport, like we saw in Washington, D.C. recently, you are totally under the control of the ATC, the air traffic controller, and that in this pilot's opinion, they had the Black Hawk too close to the regional jet, and he puts it on them. What's your take on that?
Yeah, that's partially true to me, Chris. Thank you for taking my call. I used to work in an airport that worked a lot of helicopters in and around commercial aircraft. And the question that comes to my mind is, when the controller was working the helicopter, why didn't he call a clock position on the traffic and get the Black Hawk pilot to be looking in the direction that the controller wanted him to look at? And
why is it so? When you say clock position, you're meaning as a perspective based on a watch face. So 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, and that gives you an angle
exactly.
of visibility. But why wasn't it enough for the ATC to call out the description of the airplane, which he did multiple times?
Well, that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. A normal traffic call would have been a Black Hawk helicopter traffic's at 10 o'clock, 2 miles, a regional jet descending out of 1,000 feet.
All right. I appreciate you for your perspective on this. And also, am I right in what I'm saying in this Philly crash situation that that plane was on fire as much as it was at that kind of altitude and basically dropping right out of the sky? You're dealing with a mass catastrophic event where pilots couldn't have had any control. Dusty got rid of the call. All right, another call?
Yeah, we have Arthur, and he is a former pilot and an aerospace engineer. He's Arthur.
Arthur, thank you very much for calling. Which do you want to talk about, Philly or D.C.?
Chris, first of all, hello. I was on CNN for a year back in the MH370 case. And my claim to fame is aviation lawyer, also pilot and former aerospace engineer. So I'm happy to talk about D.C. I'm happy to talk about Philly. You can ask me anything you want, just about any subject.
So D.C., there's this last two callers were trying to make the point that air traffic control was in control and that maybe they didn't explain the situation the right way to the chopper and maybe they didn't have it far enough away.
Okay, so I've analyzed this thing. I don't think there's any question in my mind about what happened and the way the controllers handled it. The controller handled this. So the American Airlines plane was set up originally for runway 1 at Reagan National. That runway is the single busiest runway in the United States of America. The controller was all alone that night handling that sector, commercial airlines into and out of Reagan, and he was also the only controller handling military aircraft in the corridor where the helicopter was. So the communication, I was critical of this and still am, by the controller to the Black Hawk helicopter, whether he knew at that point, by the way, parenthetically, that the helicopter was a half a mile outside the corridor and higher than he should have been, remains to be seen. There are pros and cons to that. But he said, do you have the American Airlines traffic in sight? And then he repeated that. And then you almost had a perfunctory response from the Black Hawk plane, whether it was a pilot in control or the check pilot. This was a check ride flight that particular night. He said, yes, we do we request visual separation. Now, the point of that is that coming from the